Hi there, I'm Helen Gerling, CEO of Shaping Cloud, a business dedicated to ensuring customers achieve their goals when using cloud services. With my co-host Leon, we're starting a series called Clarity on Cloud. How many we'll do and how long we'll do it is all entirely up in the air at this point, but we plan to have conversations with each other and hopefully interview some really interesting business and tech leaders that we don't hear being aired elsewhere. So before we get started, Leon, do you want to share who you are and whether you have any biases you want to declare?
Hello everyone, I'm Leon Fox, Chief Technologist at Shaping Cloud. I think it's fair to say I have a bias towards cloud. But I'd say there's also a heavy dose of pragmatism alongside that. So that's me setting things straight from the start.
What do you mean though when you have a bias towards cloud? What do you mean by cloud?
By cloud, I mean modern transformed workloads in a public hyperscale setting. I think that's an important differentiator. I firmly believe that hyperscale is really the only descriptor of cloud that really makes sense. And what I mean by modern transformed, I think cloud to me means services that are run natively, designed for and optimized for hyperscale environments.
Okay, cool. I mean, it's funny because I would say I'm probably pro hyperscaler too, and I'd say that that's a bias I've got, but actually I probably wouldn't take it to the extent that you've taken it. I think I would say there is a place for other clouds. I think for SaaS, obviously, I'm sure you meant that anyway when you said hyperscale as well. SaaS sitting on hyperscale is obviously a version of cloud that a lot of people think of when they hear the term cloud, and that's definitely a major part of the future, right, for any organization. But then I guess there is private cloud with respect to, things that have to be on-prem at the moment. I wouldn't necessarily say I would go for, a private cloud provider that sits between on-prem and hyperscale cloud. But certainly there's cloud technologies that can be used in a private setting, right, that can really help optimize and modernize and virtualize a lot that's done.
And that's where the pragmatism comes in. It's the right tool for the right job. And so absolutely, if you can give all the headaches and burden away to a truly SaaS provider, fantastic. That is pure cloud. If you can leverage the services that they offer so that you're abstracting what you need to do, brilliant, that's fantastic. If you absolutely have to run the services yourself and do some of the legwork yourself as part of an IaaS implementation, yeah, cool. That's also cool, as long as you're understanding why you're doing it and the benefits of that role.
Yeah, I think what we're saying really is there's benefits and tools that you can get from a hyperscaler platform that just aren't available elsewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a rate of change and a rate of pace that the hyperscalers provide that just isn't, with the best will in the world and all the right intentions, just isn't available elsewhere. There are narrow elements of it that niche organizations can provide a solid solution around, or a solid cloud around, but at the breadth and pace that the hyperscalers can meet, you just can't meet those challenges anywhere else.
We've decided to start our podcast, first episode of our podcast, with a super interesting and engaging topic, right?
Yeah, I think I might have said previously, if you could think of the worst topic to start talking about clarity of cloud and being really exciting, cloud optimization is probably not the one to do. But we're going to do it anyway, right?
We are going to do it anyway, because there is a reason, there is a sense behind the madness, Leon. And that is, yes, everyone's talking about AI. Probably we should do something on that at some point. But actually, the biggest issue, the biggest pain point for IT leaders today, in all of the surveys I've read, is cloud costs. It is a real issue. And we're clarity on cloud, we're cutting through the noise, talking about stuff that really matters, right? And if that is the biggest pain point for IT leaders today, that's the nettle we need to grasp and go for it. So that's why we're here.
Yeah.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you about was particularly, well, what I've got is some data actually, right? We're technologists, we're techies, got to get to the data. What does the data tell us? So I've got a chart for you. It's from Flexarea's State of the Cloud report. I'm going to share it on here so that everyone can see it. But essentially, one of the questions that they asked in this report was, what's your annual public cloud spend? So just to be clear, that doesn't include SaaS spend. They do have another chart for SaaS spend. I think I have it here. Yeah, there you go. There is a SaaS spend chart. It's actually even more spend than public cloud. But with respect to public cloud spend, what I've taken from this, and I have done a little bit of digging behind these stats for you, Leon, just to make sure that we are talking about something that is real. And there are 35% of respondents to this were from some sort of tech company. So I think it's safe to say we might want to exclude some of the spend here, assuming those are large global SaaS companies or tech providers. But even if you can consider that the top 35% of consumers are those tech companies, there's still a quarter of organizations spending between 2.4 and $12 million a year on public cloud spend. So that's a lot, right?
Seemingly, yes. Those numbers are large to every person looking at those numbers individually. They are large numbers. I think what that chart doesn't show is those numbers as a proportion or aligned to IT budgets or the size of the organization and things like that. So yes, 2.4 million sounds like a big number, but actually if the value you're receiving from that 2.4 million spend is 15 times that or 100 times that, then it doesn't become such a big number. So on their own, the numbers are significant, and there's probably ways of maybe reducing those numbers slightly, a little bit, but yeah, they're significant numbers, and there's cost there definitely.
How do you think it compares with the spend that people, that you've seen those sorts of similar organizations spending on tech anyway before people started adopting cloud?
Yeah, the difference looks like significant annual spend in really, really big numbers, whereas historically what you might see is bumps and curves of large investment and capital spend that then live for 8 to 10 years. So they're forgotten about, right? As an organization, you might spend 1.5 million on a SAN, for example, or you might refit a data center and have very significant numbers associated with that, but that's long forgotten in the eyes of the people comparing and looking at things. So it's that steady high rate of cost, which is certainly something to consider and talk about.
Yeah, it's got to feel painful for organizations, right? I mean, $10 million a year, you've got someone wants to have you explain what you're getting for that money, right?
Oh, yes.
So some people might say that cloud is just an endless money pit. Do they have a point, or are they just doing it wrong?
I think they have a point. I definitely think the word endless is useful to maybe narrow down on there. The whole point of moving to that sort of operating revenue cost that we're becoming used to now is the fact that it's a constant or a known quantity of a cost that whilst it may seem high, there are no surprises, or there should be no surprises in that. So yeah, there is that element to it. So I think maybe there is a perception around costs being high. So yeah, that's my view on that. So
are you just for a comparison at some point? Are you a lease car guy, or do you purchase your car?
It's a really good analogy, isn't it? It's one that I've thought of frequently myself. I've now got a 10-year-old car that's been paid for.
10-year-old car. Oh,
10-year-old car that's been paid for, and it serves a purpose, and I can get where I'm going in it. But I'm frustrated sometimes that it can't do the cool new things that modern cars can do. I'm frustrated that it might not be as efficient as modern cars, and I know that there will be some lumpy costs to come in the near future as things break or need replacing. That just isn't the certainty that you get with a leased car. So Maybe I'm looking to get a lease car next time.
But have you put that money aside to save so that you've got that big spend for your next car?
No, absolutely not. No.
Do you think that might have been a smart thing to do?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I mean, it's similar to on-prem
right?
costs, right? It's like you spend that amount, you buy the sand, you buy the infrastructure, and then you use it for that, 5, sometimes 8 or more years period. And then the business, you'd like to think, they've known that this large cost is coming again, they've put that money aside, but often it's, fighting for capital again, isn't it, to buy the next replacement.
And the perceived value of the replacement is no longer there because the service has been running, the applications have been running on that kit. So the risks and the frailties of that is not necessarily something that might get board level view or the view from the execs within the organisation.
So in your experience, what are the biggest culprits of cloud spend?
The biggest culprits of cloud spend. So I would say the number one culprit that we see is not to put the blame at vendors' doors, but organisations have their systems of records, their line of business applications that they love and they've had ingrained within the organisation for a decade. They were built for virtualization at best. The vendors architected them monolithic for a certain way of working, shall we say, and trying to transplant that into cloud comes with inefficiencies. So for applications like that are, for example, compute heavy, memory heavy, storage, performance heavy, that naturally translates into cost into cloud. That's one of the main areas I would see. So other things on a similar vein, workloads supporting highly transactional workloads requiring the most premium of disks and the most, the highest SKUs of virtual machines to support it. They are typically ones that we see to be the most costly. Outside of that, I would suggest things like organizations that have almost like a log everything approach. So they're filling up lots and lots of storage within cloud with logs covering monitoring, covering diagnostics, covering security, with a forever type approach to it, in that they're not weeding out not what's not needed, not expiring what can be expired, and that's just a money pit essentially.
Is it? I mean, I think I know the answer to this question because I've spoken to a lot of organisations where this isn't the case. But is it often down to not being able to get an answer out of the business as to how long those logs, those records need to be kept for?
I think I'm specifically talking about stuff that's in the IT and security domain. So, diagnostic logs and monitoring logs that are serving an IT purpose rather than a auditing purpose, for example, or a business purpose. So, for example, keeping security logs for longer than 90 days or something like that, where they're not really necessarily needed. Or, for example, diagnostics information about a VM workload or an app service workload for longer than 30 days, when any troubleshooting requirements well and truly gone within that time frame.
Well, I mean, I can absolutely see why you wouldn't necessarily need to keep the diagnostics for a long period of time, but the security logs, there may be regulatory reasons why they need to keep those for a lengthy period of time, right?
Sure, but the approach to keeping them isn't necessarily keeping them in the log store. You can farm those out to storage and things like that. So it's about choosing the right way of doing things, not necessarily having a one size fits all and a log everything forever.
And that kind of tiered storage approach to all data is one of the key foundations of cloud architecture, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So what are some of the most common traps companies can fall into with respect to cost?
One of the things we see or we walk into occasionally in a customer environment is a business case for migration or a business case for moving workloads into cloud is sized upfront for a business case. So at the point where the assessment or the sizing for those workloads or for that cost is done, it's to prove that something can move and to prove that there is, to get the cost justification to move. Actually, when that bears out into reality, there are things that haven't necessarily been considered as part of that. So an easy example is using something like, in Microsoft world, Azure Migrate to estimate the cost of running 10 virtual machines in Azure. That's the Microsoft idea. That would just take into account those 10 virtual machines. It would take into account the right sizing for those virtual machines, but actually when you land that workload into Azure, it wouldn't take into account things like the networking associated with those virtual machines, the additional storage outside of the VMs, the firewall costs that would be attributed to that, the ability to have load balancers on top of that solution. All those things are a step in detail beyond what is sometimes provided at that stage, and therefore they're almost like classed as unknown costs. And with the best will in the world, sometimes things are missed. So sometimes there's a 10%, 15% contingency put into that planning, but sometimes not even that's done.
So what you're saying is, whatever cost someone estimates cloud to be, it will be more expensive.
I think so.
Okay. So you're agreeing that cloud is expensive.
I think there is an element of expense to it. I would certainly not say cloud is cheap. I would say cloud is on a par when you compare equivalent workloads with the equivalent resources on cloud and on-prem and hybrid and public private cloud. I would say there is some parity because the markets dictate it.
So one of the other questions asked was, what are your top metrics for assessing progress against cloud goals? And the things that people are measuring are cost efficiency savings, obviously one of the top ones. So they're expecting to come into the cloud and achieve cost savings. Speed of new product services, as innovation, lower down, so some of the same things. Increased competitive advantage. I think all of those go together. Number of workloads migrated, which seems a bit of an arbitrary stat because it's just about progress against a project, isn't it? But cost avoidance again, so there's another cost avoidance theme there. Customer adoption of cloud-based offerings, again, I think that's more about progress than outcome that they're measuring. But you can see there, that's what they're measuring in terms of progress against their cloud goals, which gives, and it doesn't tell you what their cloud goals are, but it certainly gives an indication as to the flavour of those cloud goals. So if cloud's expensive, or perhaps more expensive than people might anticipate, but yet cost efficiency savings are one of the main drivers, how do those two things marry up?
Yeah, I'd probably say first that whilst all those other drivers, such as delivering business value, such as adoption of cloud offerings, such as speed of innovation, each one of those in isolation isn't the full story. I would suggest whilst each one of those is a main driver in an IT strategy or a cloud strategy, alongside that will inevitably be cost element to that. So alongside it will inevitably be, and of course we want to keep costs neutral or make savings, and therefore whatever the primary drivers would be, I would suggest that the strategy will also always say savings and efficiency go alongside that. So there's always an aspiration to save alongside. Whether that's possible or whether that's achievable is down to good design, down to good architecture, down to knowing the solutions, down to knowing your business use cases, and architecting accordingly. So when you say the number one reason there is around cost savings, and we're saying potentially that cloud is expensive or cloud isn't cheap, is probably one way that I put it.
I think that's fair to say. Cloud isn't cheap is a much better way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question comes, if we understand that cloud isn't cheap, and we understand that these other business drivers are important, then it's about, and I guess it's the point of what we come into, how can we optimize the costs so that we are delivering the business value or getting the outcomes that we want to achieve, whilst not getting costs we don't want to achieve.
Yeah, so getting value for money, right? Traditional age-old thing. It's not about how much it costs at Mount, it's the value versus cost equation. Yeah, is it worth it? Exactly. Because otherwise it sounds like, okay, cloud's expensive, people are expecting cloud cost savings. It just sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, right?
Yeah, I guess maybe 5 years ago, doing cloud strategy work, understanding what customers were expecting, what was being promised, even by the hyperscalers, I guess. But but certainly from a sales perspective, you would see back then, move to cloud, it's cheaper. You can get efficiencies from scale. Those sorts of I won't say promises, but those sorts of messages. I think the market's matured to that a little bit over the last 5 years. I would hope so. There is certainly efficiencies to get from a cost perspective, but I would suggest they're more focused and tactical rather than everything you do will be cheaper in cloud.
Yeah. I mean, we disclosure, we met each other at the beginning of a pretty large program reviewing infrastructure and hosting for 20 different organizations, didn't we? And we were looking at what a cloud first strategy might look like for those, costs, benefits, alignment with overall organizational strategies. I think even back then, to be fair, this 2018, we intentionally didn't say to people, go to cloud because it will save you money, right? That was never the message. It wasn't, this is the solution to your financial problems. It was, this is an enabler. It's a platform that's going to give you access to innovative tools. You can make it more or less cost neutral. And there is a cost of change, obviously, to going to that different platform. But in the long run, you should find you've got something that's far more enabling for your business, enabling you to be more responsive to your business, aligned to your wider business transformation strategies, and you will at least be able to know where things are costing you, and therefore be able to inform the business about how they can reduce those costs as a result of understanding how those things related. So, for instance, your finance system is costing you this amount, and being that really, really transparent about that, so that they can drive down usage and cost and make savings at the point at which they stop that usage or change how they're doing things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing, really, after reviewing 10 to 15 total cost of ownership models for organizations, rather annoyingly, they would have most often come out relatively cost neutral. So, even trying to put a biased positive spin on it, that the numbers would look pretty even if you really, really did compare the total cost of a data center and all the infrastructure within it, and the cost of management and the operational costs and the licensing that fulfills the same role as what you get in cloud. The costs do come out pretty neutral, and therefore,
if I have to put an if there, Leon, if you move everything that's on premise,
yes, absolutely,
into cloud as an infrastructure as a service, right? You maybe a little bit of modernization, but I think the other statistics we've proven over those umpteen TCO models and strategies is about 50% of all things hosted in a traditional data center is IT management tools, right?
Yeah, very much so. There's a lot of IT for IT's sake, almost, that persists for a long time within a data center space, and it's amazing how much storage and compute footprint is literally covered by that. So yeah, I mean, when we do these models, there is modernization in there, right? There is potentially moving things to SaaS as well.
But prudent modernization, yeah.
But the costs largely come out similar. There's not been too many really uncompelling, if that's a word, ones
that
we've done.
There's not an argument against it, for sure.
There's not been somewhere it's been drastically more expensive based on the modelling we've done. There has been somewhere it's come out cost positive to a degree, but the savings are, potentially rounding errors from a finance perspective, rather than really compelling multi-million-pound savings every year.
Or poor utilisation of the on-prem infrastructure, right? Aged equipment, maybe not best value procurement processes. Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons why the on-prem might be more expensive than is necessary, right?
Yeah, sure.
Have you ever seen a cloud bill that's made someone's jaw drop? Go on, tell me about it.
I've seen two instances. I've seen a predicted, like a view of what will be the case if we move this service to cloud, and we were talking, for one important service for the business, but one distinct business function, business capability, in up towards like £100,000 a month for an organisation, and that was not palatable, in the slightest, because that the bulk of that cost is not acknowledged as a cost, an existing cost, because it's a sunk cost from 5 to 10 years ago. So that we've just talked about, the avoidance of cost and things like that. But that's, when you look at it as a cold hard number that's going to have to go through finance system every month, that's a significant number. Just
absolutely 1.2 million a year, right?
And that gets everybody thinking, oh hell, if that's what we're going to have to pay for one of these things, we know there's another 10 of these things to go. It soon creates a bad perception.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it must be difficult to justify a £1.2 million cost for any business system, right? In any organisation, to have that as a cost per year, it's got to be delivering umpteen times that, like 10 times that, right? So,
yeah,
so was there anything in particular about that workload that would have reduced the costs of hosting cloud, or is that just how cloud is for some types of workload?
And this is where I was talking earlier about the types of workload where you see to be like culprits for high cost. So they are the types of vendor controlled workloads where possibly some point in the distant past there's been a document which says thou must have this many gigabytes of RAM and this many cores and this many processors, and that thou storage throughput shall be this, and those things just don't necessarily equate very well to the modern world, whereby they're sized for peak performance, for example, or to make sure from a supportability perspective that service is always running optimally, because once it's purchased and once it's been through that cycle, it's paid for, right? So those sorts of patterns don't necessarily translate well if left as is on-prem.
Where did the idea come from that cloud would save money?
The benefits of cloud, as have been discussed for probably a decade now, around scaling, around bursting, around being able to be efficient about the use of compute, essentially, and the use of things when you need them, but don't pay for it when you don't need them. That's where the cost savings, or the value, the cost efficiencies should be being seen, and we do see that in places. Like that is a pattern that is well used now. If you think about Citrix or VDI or Horizon, environments on premise, you need a really large estate for to run that VDI footprint. You equally need a really large backup DR estate to run the DR sides of that. That's a lot of cost every 5 years to have, as well as the licensing cost associated with that, as well as the etc. If you can minimize that cost to only providing the compute as it's needed by the users, there's significant savings to be had there. So it is true that there are savings to be had there, as long as it's designed right, as long as the processes are in place to make that actually happen. And where we see sometimes that doesn't quite hit the mark, is where you see costs start rising and people start reverting to the way they've done things in the past, potentially just bringing machines up, or just creating app services and just leaving them to run and forgetting about them. So it's the governance and controls which really need to be understood.
We've talked before about like different stages on the cloud journey and the different feelings or thoughts that people have as they go through that cloud journey, all the way from thinking about I want to start playing with cloud or adopting cloud and seeing what it can do for my organization, all the way through to really optimizing and delivering value and focusing on far more transformative and interesting things like data and automation, etc., and AI. Why do you think, where on that journey, why do you think someone might start thinking about or worrying about the cost of cloud?
So a cloud journey inevitably starts with some sort of strategy, cloud strategy, IT strategy, suggesting, outlining why moving to the cloud, moving workloads to the cloud will give business value, be that through taking advantage of technology there that just isn't available on-prem, or any of the other reasons that we've already started talking about. That journey inevitably starts with moving things out of a data center, or moving things from their existing position into cloud, so you can take advantage of locality, the data and data gravity and things like that. Moving those workloads, unless they're done extremely efficiently, will start to potentially look costly, and symptoms of that might, for example, be pressures or questions coming from finance or from an exec team around why things are costing a little bit more or significantly more than were part of a business case that we kind of talked about earlier. So that's one kind of symptom that you might see. Equally, sentiment around cloud is expensive, might just anecdotally be heard within an organization, might start appearing in meetings, or offhand comment here or there. So you might start to almost like feel the winds of change and the positivity around cloud slowly like leaking away a little bit and being replaced with, well, if we're going to move this to cloud, there's going to be extra cost, and we can't guarantee this and that kind of stuff. So sometimes that creeps in. The worst thing that that I've potentially seen come across is conversations, almost like anti-cloud conversations, that start with, maybe we should be doing this an alternative way. Should we look at a data center to do this? Or why don't we reuse the kit we've got in-house? All we need to do is buy another storage system, or we only need to buy more. We can do that a lot quicker and a lot cheaper. So it's those sorts of conversations that you start to see happening if it's the trust and the confidence in cloud is eroded if things have started badly.
So how does one mitigate that? How do you start, when you start hearing those things or seeing those things, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think it needs to be before then. I think it's, that if you're starting to hear and see those things, that the rot's already set in to a degree, and that's quite a negative way of putting it. But lessons from out in the field are that if it's got to that stage where you're hearing whispers, then it's kind of moved up the chain a little bit too quickly, and therefore the important thing to do is really get ahead of that and put in some really strong foundations when you start in the process, when you move in those first workloads, when you're building the teams around governance and cloud center of excellence and all that good stuff that you've probably seen in documentation from the cloud providers. It's really starting on a strong footing. It's not irreparable. I think some really good, strong wins and messages around cost optimization done right and done quickly can stifle those conversations, can steer back towards a strategy, but that has to be done immediately and it has to be done well to get some stories in the way. But as I say before, much easier if you start well and you start with structure.
Yeah, well, and like you say, it comes back to that foundational strategy, right? And why you're doing it, but also what that cost profile is going to look like, and are we on track for that? Because there's nothing worse than paying twice for the same thing, right? So until you can really get to that point where you are in a cloud-first architecture, it's going to be difficult to reduce those costs on-prem, right? The data center still needs to be there, the cooling still needs to be there, etc. So you almost need to get to that, really focus on getting to that first bit, I think, where you can go, look, we didn't buy that because we've got this far with our cloud journey, and really make the most of that. Don't let that be hidden. Put that front and center in your business stakeholder conversations. Look, we would have had to replace the SAN at this point, but we haven't. Look, we've been able to consolidate onto one SAN, or not buy more compute as a result of where we are now, that kind of thing. I think is really important. So there is a statistic actually from that same report that I found, and it does show actually, whilst organizations are really focusing on optimizing existing use of cloud at the moment, which suggests that they do feel that they're overspending. The second most important initiative that they're taking are to migrate more workloads to cloud. And I'd like to think that if they're migrating more workloads to cloud, it's not that they're not worried about the cost so much that they're thinking, oh, we're not achieving the benefits we're trying to achieve. We've gone down the wrong route here from a strategic perspective. It's more just we need to refine this and bring these costs down to where we expected them to be, or at least so that they're efficient, more so than pulling out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The positive thing there is, as you say, organizations doing more, moving more workloads into cloud. That to me suggests that they are getting some of the benefits that they were signing up to, but equally it suggests that along all the threads of drivers, of outcomes that they're looking to achieve as a business, cost really needs to be a thread of its own alongside everything, which is why cost optimization, FinOps, and terms like that are so front and center right now.
So what can people do then to optimize those costs? So if you could give someone 3 things right now to cut their cloud bill, what would that be?
Number one, get the basics in place. Most enterprises, I hope, have the basics in place now, but from reviewing organizations over the last few years, some of them don't. The most basic you need to do in cloud is set up things like budgets and alerts. Have a budget for a workload as part of the design phase, understand what it's likely to cost you, and make sure that is a known quantity when you actually create that workload in cloud. Have that. That's the lowest form of automation and control is to have the alerts in place, so that when you get anywhere close to that budget, a message is fired off to probably somebody with a financial view, not to the IT help desk, somebody that understands the cost implications of it. That's really basic, right? That's really basic, but you'd be surprised how many times we come across things that have been fast, things that have been done possibly by a supplier, that don't necessarily have those governance controls in place. So think about the basics. That's really key. So that's number one. Number two, review what has been done before. A lot of the efficiencies that we see are looking back at how things have been architected or configured maybe 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and asking ourselves, is that still the right way of doing it? Is that still the best SKU to be in, or is that still the right way to configure logging against that service or something like that? Sometimes just simply changing things to what has been changed by the cloud provider will give benefits. And in an enterprise setting, some of those benefits are quite significant. Examples of that, the way firewall diagnostics logs are recorded, for example, in a Microsoft environment, an Azure environment, that's changed. The recommendations we would have given 4 years ago to what we'd give today are significantly different. And there's evidenceable benefits to changing those configurations. So that's the second one. That's a really easy thing to do, right? The third one, use the smarts within the cloud providers' solutions. It's in the hyperscalers' benefit to keep you on their platform. It's in their benefit to give you the cost metrics and tell you, hey, you could actually be saving money here. They do it well, actually. They do a really good job of it. There's certain things, there's certain things that are quite dramatic, and you wouldn't necessarily do them for the cost balance, that we talked about earlier. But there is certainly a real eye opener to some areas where you wouldn't even know you were spending, I don't know, £2,000 a month on a very specific thing, or some IP addresses that were configured 5 years ago for a service that got mothballed. It's those sorts of things that, in isolation, small scale, but when you add them in as a process internally, that's where it's developed.
So on-prem, we're very used to a lot of that technical debt, or just kind of sprawl of different rules and firewalls, or systems of VMs that are running that we've got we're running and things like that. But we didn't feel the pain of that because the environment is just prepaid, and then you just refresh it every several every 5-6 years. Is that one of the side benefits then of cloud, that actually, because you're really focused on that cost optimization whilst you go through that journey, you can also, as you address those cost issues, you also are tidying up as you go, with respect to things that are really important. You don't need those. If you don't need those IP addresses and you want to release those and not have them addressable, and if you have rules that aren't in use anymore, you want to switch those off, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In an on-prem state, there is no significant immediate cost to decommissioning, right? If you build out a test environment and it never turns into a thing, forgetting about deleting those VMs has no significant immediate cost. Yes, there is a cost down the line. There's technical debt there, but there's no immediate cost. There's an immediate cost in cloud. For every one of those things that you deploy and forget, there's a cost, and they compound as you start to deploy and forget more things. So again, it comes down to good governance and actually having the budgeting and reporting there for them.
But the brilliant thing is they immediately benefit from switching it off as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The second it's off, the second you're not paid for it. So yeah. Of course that does lead into conversations about reserving things to save costs, and there's a view that absolutely you can save money there, and absolutely there are 20-30% discounts for doing things over the course of a year or 3 years. Is the counter argument that that's anti-cloud, because it's almost getting into that capital investment that it seems to be the antithesis, but there's cost savings there. So it's about the balance and about the pragmatism of doing it.
Workload by workload, right? There are workloads that are very likely to be there and running exactly as they are in 3 years' time. You lock that in for 3 years, you can get 70% or more saving actually for those. Whereas other workloads, you may only be able to predict for a year, so commit for a year, cash in those, that 30% saving. And then those whereby, it is a dev environment, it is something IT just need to put on for a while. You don't know, it could be a proof of concept, it could be they're just testing something, switch it on and then switch it off again, right? So you're not paying for it.
But that's basic, right? That's basic of cost control, cost management.
Yes, absolutely. I think probably the bigger area, I would say, you see sprawl is in data, in storage, right? Have you seen any examples of storage just kind of going up and up and up and up in terms of usage and cost size?
Yeah, inefficiencies around storage often come from using the same processes and ways of working that existed on-prem. So, the on-prem, keeping more backups just in case, archiving data, but letting the data grow, not understanding that there's a finite use of that data, or there's a finite need for that data. We talked about security data earlier on, but outside of that, just generally, having dumping grounds of data is something that is now a thorny problem when you're looking to transform and migrate into cloud, because of that technical debt that's developed over the last 10 years, and that's a problem. So seeing that same mentality, or that same way of working in cloud, is equally damaging, but more so because every time you keep that data, it's costing you more.
When we're talking about backups here, we're not talking about backing up data that needs to be retrieved at some later date, right? We're talking about backing up systems. So you take the system back up, and really it's just there so that if something breaks, you can recover to that point in time. And yet, I would argue IT has a historic habit of not knowing how long they should keep those backups for, so almost keeping them forever, right?
Yeah, I don't think I have come across an organization that does it brilliantly. I would say the technology has changed to allow organizations to be better placed to manage that data. So modern appliance-based systems, I won't name any names, allow SLA-based retention policies and things like that. So as long as the business can tell you, we only need this data set for X amount of time, you can store it for only X amount of time. If the business tells you that you need it for 7 years, you can store it for 7 years. But that's always the problem, right? It's always getting it from the business.
But it's educating, isn't it, to help them understand that they don't need to be afraid of deleting those things. Is it possible that cloud is kind of like an all-you-can-eat buffet where people just take too much and regret it later? Are they just, when we look at cloud spend, I think we often see that when people start to adopt cloud, they start spending more, but it's not necessarily because they're doing the same as what they did on-prem. They're almost doing more. So is there, is it possibly a tendency there to just kind of go, okay, well, it's all there, and I just want it. I want to use it.
I think there is. I think there's probably developing a natural curve to an organization's adoption of cloud and the curve around spend for that. So you get your initial trial in cloud, maybe moving a few workloads into cloud, which is probably inefficient, but is not a noticeable cost to the business. Then the organization get more comfortable with cloud and say, okay, we're gonna do this thing right, and start and do some sort of mass migration, or do a large program that starts breaking all hell loose, in all honesty, because you'll be moving workloads into clouds, you'll be doing inefficient IaaS migrations, you'll be starting up data projects, you'll be doing new integration systems, you'll be doing all those things at the same time, and all of a sudden your finance team are going to see this baseline cost go from down here to spiral right up to here, whilst you're still paying for costs of the things on-prem, for example. And that's when the questions start happening, and you start trying to understand that. So it's at that point where everybody's really excited by cloud, right? They're really excited by the technologies and the tools and the toys that they've been given access to.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to try it, and that's brilliant, right? But it's during that phase that gets tempered with the cost of doing so. So maybe organizations need to, ahead of that phase or ahead of that curve, think about the controls and think about what they can do to get those cost issues.
Yeah, I'm thinking now, actually, the analogy I've given is not right, is it? Because an all-you-can-eat buffet, you pay one price and you can eat whatever you like. Whereas actually, you go in thinking it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, but actually each of those plates is going to cost you something, isn't it? It's more like a sushi bar experience.
Yeah, that's right.
Every plate you
the bill comes when you've finished eating.
Yeah, exactly. So if you, I think so. We talked about the top three I would say probably obvious things that someone could do to cut their cloud bill. Where have you seen cloud costs drop dramatically that perhaps is maybe not so much of an obvious thing that a tool in a hyperscaler would point out?
Yeah, so as we talked to, what the automated tooling in the hyperscale does do well is look at the common things which are going to cost. So, for example, the performance, the underutilization of virtual machines, for example, or the wrong storage tier for a workload that's using premium disks and it doesn't need premium disks, but everything was given premium. So they're the basic things. Where we see the real value and the real savings is a little bit like I was talking about earlier, is reassessing architectures and reassessing how things were designed when they were initially implemented. So, for example, when a service might have been implemented, it might have just been a straight lift and shift from on-premises into the cloud. Therefore, the tooling might have told you that you need ultra disks to run a highly transactional system or something like that, or you might need you might bring over a file server to keep the same role that was used by an application on-prem. Well, actually, if you rethink that architecture and take advantage of modernization, take advantage of some of the services that you get in Azure, which you just don't touch, or you can't touch on premises, here's where some real savings can occur. So things like, for example, we don't need actually that file server VM that's been serving that purpose on-prem for the last 5 to 10 years. We migrate that data onto Azure Files or an equivalent service in another cloud provider. There's significant savings there from you don't need that VM anymore. You're literally just paying for the storage as it's being accessed and consumed. You might have a large SQL footprint, for example, that's using really, really expensive things like ultra disks that are guaranteeing really fast performance to disk for SQL, which is a beast in some systems. If you think about re-architecting that to take advantage of services, that can provide that tiering of data, but on a more economic scale. And I won't name any types of those systems, but come see you later. But yeah, absolutely, they will, and we can evidence significant savings there in the high sort of 70 to 80% savings on very significant costs in those areas. So they're the ones that they're the high profile ones. They're the really good news stories, and that all comes from modernizing. That all comes from understanding the technologies, that understanding what that landscape looked like, and don't just assume that what was done 2 or 3 years ago is the right way to go now.
Yeah, I mean, you say don't mention technologies, but you have mentioned Microsoft Azure a lot, although I know you're saying it, the same applies to AWS or whoever. But yeah, there is something about those third-party tools, right? I mean, I think there are some third-party tools that you can deploy to Azure and or AWS, and they are promoted by those vendors as being better than or providing additional functionality than the native equivalent. And there are instances where you do need those to enhance the functionality required because of certain circumstances within your business and what your needs are. But I would suggest or propose to you a lot of those actually they add cost, but not necessarily the features that are required. So there is a lot within the base platforms that you can rely upon. So there is that kind of need to say, challenge yourself and say, do I really need this additional third-party tool, or do I not? But then obviously countering that with, you're absolutely right, we have also seen there's certain third-party tools where when you deploy them appropriately in the right place, massive savings as a result of that. So it's always that functionality versus cost question and equation that we need to look at in the architecture, right?
Yeah, very much so. It comes down to the pragmatism again. Sometimes for a small cost saving, third-party technologies or doing things differently doesn't balance. But if you are if you're invested in a solution for 3 years, getting that right mix of cost into the architecture is really key.
What about AI? Everyone talks about AI now, AI, machine learning. What role could that play in getting costs under control?
Sure. So there's 2 ways you can look at this. There are definitely tools being developed in the market which apply AI reasoning across the data sets, which are essentially your costs and will provide recommendations. Equally, the hyperscalers develop their own tools, and it's part of the platform. It's been around for a while that do the same sorts of things. The tools do provide good outcomes and do provide areas to go at to make savings, to do those cost optimizations. Executing that is a different matter. So the tools are there, but the effort is in the execution. So the tooling will tell you inevitably that you can optimize this workload, this service, by doing these steps. It takes the human element to understand the impact of those steps for your particular workload and your particular business in this point in time. So that's, should never take. I would suggest at the moment there is not tooling there that allows you to automatically make those changes without human intervention or a human step within it. I think that might change. I think we're already seeing signs, in Kubernetes and solutions like that, where we know some of the processes, we know the metrics, and we know the things that are needed to be watched. If we sprinkle machine learning, AI into those elements, then there's a good chance that in the round they will benefit things, right, and auto size and auto scale with a higher degree of confidence and flexibility than we currently have with the way we do things now. So it's a promising area, and I think it's certainly one that's developing now and will develop over time. Would I bet on third parties to do to add that into a state from an operating perspective over what the hyperscalers provide themselves? It's an interesting one to watch.
I think I think it could probably be like all technology with these things, right? You've got the big players, like at AWS or Microsoft or Google, who will use all of those latest tools to massively improve their platforms over time, and you will get the benefit of that. You're getting the benefit of that now, right? So a lot of that, there's certainly automation through everything, right? That auto skilling is also already in place. You can use that. You can use automation across your workloads and your platform. You've got the analytics, so you've got the information that's coming to you already, smart analytics that tell you what you can do or identify areas where you can optimize. It's taking it that one step further and saying, okay, I can forecast this, and therefore as a result of that I'm going to take this action, and automating the taking of that action. And I think that's where the AI and the ML comes in. And I think it could mature in that way. Certainly a lot of caution around that, because you could get some really odd, unpredictable behavior as a result of that, and so you'd need to counter that with other controls to prevent that. So it's an emerging area that is very interesting one to watch. But I would say, as I said at the beginning, there likely will be third parties that come in and do that a little bit in advance of the platforms themselves. But then those platforms will adopt they'll either purchase those software companies or those tools, or they'll do replicate the same within their platform, and eventually you'll benefit from that anyway. And maybe you might say it's better to be a little bit more cautious about that stuff and adopt it as it comes in a mature way in the platform anyway, as opposed to necessarily needing to be on the bleeding edge of that adoption.
Yeah, it comes down to the workloads. If there will be niche providers who very specifically have within their parameters, really great AI, ML smarts within a very specific space. If that's your main workload, it absolutely makes sense to stay on top of that and to use that. So yeah, there are times where it absolutely makes sense to follow that thread, follow that organization, how they're building something. But you're right, for general mixed workloads and for general, use cases of cloud, absolutely the hyperscalers should be keeping up with the mainstream or staying ahead of the mainstream. So yeah, interesting.
I think we've unpacked why cloud costs feel out of control and the biggest culprits for that, and some practical steps for what businesses can actually do about it. I think we've established that cloud isn't necessarily automatically more expensive, but it is easy to overspend if you don't have the right strategies in place. I don't think we've talked about FinOps as a practice, and maybe some of the wider things an organisation can do to keep costs in check. Did you want to talk a little bit about that wider governance?
Yeah, sure. So I think cloud governance is a fairly mature area now, with regards to the information that's available, how the hyperscalers and how consulting organizations and the likes of Gartner, etc., position what cloud governance would look like in a best case example. There's quite a few years worth of experience now, right, of managing cloud and managing cost in an enterprise scale organization. The main facets of that being probably things like accountability, so ensuring people are actually responsible for those costs and accountable for those costs and aware and have the time to manage those costs. Sometimes in an organization, there are people attributed to that role, but not necessarily given the capacity and the tools to do that job. And that's where we sometimes see a downfall. So alongside that is, as well as the accountability, there's the tools and ability to give visibility of those costs. So visibility is key, right? If you can't slice and dice the costs and help your business understand what's causing those costs and the value associated with those costs, you're in deep trouble. And I think this is where, in the past, not necessarily so much now, I think organizations are definitely maturing to this, but maybe 3, 4 years ago, all cloud costs were potentially just lumped under one big cost, or maybe split into 2 or 3 costs. But that was just, wow, cloud is costing us this much, but we can't slice and dice those costs. So visibility is key. Being able to provide exec, finance, workload owners, whoever needs to see their perspective on cost, provide those costs to them, is paramount to success, paramount to being able to optimize and be efficient. So yeah, they're 2 really, 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 really strong areas where governance, the recommendations and good practice around governance are key. And then the third string to it is actually the optimization. So once you've got a baseline of cost, once you understand what is your cost as an organization, it's about saying, okay, well, what do we need to optimize? What are the opportunities for optimization? And then what are the options for optimization? Could it be re-architecture like we talked about? Is it as simple as being efficient with the SKUs and the types of capabilities we're provided? What does optimization look like? Is really, really key in understanding that.
Yeah, it goes back to continual improvement, right? Which has been a long time approach in IT. Always continuously improve, but it gives that there's the tools there now to really make the most of that, to fine tune, right, and to performance as well as costs. So if there's a key takeaway from this ramble of ours, what might that be? What would be the the one thing that you'd say to somebody? Start here.
Wherever you are on your journey, don't leave it till later. Start now. Whether the governance around it is small scale and taking accountability yourself, or deciding who's accountable and getting those basics in place. Don't leave it till the end of the project. Don't leave it to the end of a migration wave or anything like that. Start those discussions now. Put something in place at least. Have an understanding of where your visibility is coming from, how the visibility is there, and yeah, what the process is for optimizing when you get to that stage, because inevitably you will get to the stage where you need to optimize very, very quickly. It might come at the end of your first migration. If you're doing it through following a good process, there will inevitably be a post-delivery optimization hypercare type stage where somebody should be looking at that workload and saying, well, it's been 30 days now, and we've never got past 12% performance on the processor. So that comes at a really early stage, but you've got to have that person looking at it, and you've got to have the controls in place. So start now is what I would say. Don't leave it till the end of the program.
I'd also say that, if you're still on the fence about cloud because of the costs, maybe it's time to reframe the question, not is cloud cheaper, but how can I best use cloud in the right way? So yeah, maybe going back to my buffet analogy, maybe cloud is more like an a la carte menu. Consider all that's on the menu and order wisely according to your diet and your needs, right?
Absolutely.
So we'd love to hear from you. What's the craziest cloud bill you've ever seen? What war stories do you have? Or are there any helpful tips we haven't talked about? Please drop a message or post a comment, and we'll see you next time. And if you found this useful, please do hit the like button or perhaps share it with a colleague, and let's keep this conversation going. Thanks, Leon, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Cheerio.